Okay. Hi everyone, it's Jazz here and I'm joined today by Tony from One Nucleus and Tarquin from George James Limited. So today we're going to be discussing careers across the sector, the opportunities available, how you get there, how you maintain it, and if you're thinking about maybe shifting careers. We're going to kind of cover all aspects if we can. So this is going to form part of our Conversations in Careers sessions for the Building Life Science Adventures conference. So before we get started, Tarquin, do you want to give us a little introduction just about what you do, just a little bit of background before we get going?
Yeah, certainly. And thank you, Jazz. Thank you, Tony and One Nucleus, for including us in this, and delighted to be here today. So my name's Tarquin Bennett-Coles. I work for George James Limited. I have a background initially in teaching, also potentially in professional rugby, but I went down the teaching route instead, and then stumbled, like a lot of people, into recruitment, purely life sciences, and have been doing that for about 2 decades, covering both the permanent and interim markets. And obviously over that period of time, and with a background of teaching, have continued to talk to people about careers, development pathways, things they can do to extend both their knowledge as exists, but also maybe to expand and move into other areas of the industry. So I'm hoping today to maybe come across and give some ideas and tips about how you can expand beyond where you currently are, and maybe give an overview of the sector as a whole, which I know Tony and Jazz and everyone at One Nucleus supports. So delighted to be here. Thank you, Jazz.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's brilliant. It'd be great actually if have you got any case studies maybe that you feel would be interesting to share, just to get going, maybe on maybe a career that you didn't expect to come across in the life sciences?
Yeah, I can certainly do that. So one of the things that's come up a few times is when companies themselves have had to pivot from one speciality into another. So there've been a couple of examples where I've worked with either an individual or a company that have started out focused in one space, and then their technology or device, and I'm thinking about device in this case, became applicable in another area. And so the business, both for investment purposes and the team, had to suddenly think, okay, rather than looking at market A, we now have to work as a business looking at market B, and bring in resources and people who've got expertise in that area. So particularly at the moment with things like convergent technology, and you're looking at AI and digital health. If I use an example locally of what used to be Psychology Online, or ISO Digital Health, that's a great business looking at cognitive behavioral therapy and doing that online. And I know initially when they were starting out, they had to get a proof of concept and get it into the clinic. And it was an idea that had come from another country, but it was in the UK where they wanted to roll this out and talk to various trusts and others. So that was a fascinating example of actually they had this great idea, this great technology, but at the time, I guess the sector wasn't necessarily ready for it. And now here we are doing everything online. And of course, something like ISO Digital Health is exactly where the industry is going. One of the things I would just share very briefly on that I think would be useful for people to know. So one of the great growth markets, I think, is obviously in AI technology, and they've spent a lot of time and effort bringing in people with expertise in that area. When they first started, it was very much finding the experts in cognitive behavioral therapy. So again, that's a business that had to adapt. And if you were involved at the time as a career, you may well have been thinking this is all about psychology and behavior. And actually, it's a business also with the strong AI and crossover with the healthcare market.
And that's a sort of interesting aspect, I think, that whole crossover between AI running through probably our lives in just about every facet, whether it's what insurance loading goes on down to what healthcare we get, and the approach to R&D. When you look at this, when you're placing people into those careers, if you like, you look at their CV when it comes in, do you immediately think, as a kind of a life-changing recruiter and placing people, do you look at the CVs and think, okay, what's the transferable skill set that this person's got? Or do you look at it from this is the industry the person's in? Because I guess you've got to have a mind on what's your customer and client going to respond to? Because some will be more open-minded than others in people changing direction, is my guess.
Yeah, that a brilliant question, Tony, and you're so right. So I worked in-house for AstraZeneca for a while, and they were looking for people within the AI space, for instance, and that was bringing people over to the UK. And there was a real balance there to be had about finding someone who would fit within a big pharma, global big pharma, understood the regulatory requirements that would be needed, how to navigate the different functions and parts of a business involved in pharmaceutical development, but also someone they wanted with new ideas who would come in and do it a different way. And I remember speaking to someone from EA Sports, the games business, and they had a very different mindset, which was fascinating. This person got to interview. It needed a bit of work my end to make sure that the business was keen to see this person because they didn't have the natural CV. But speaking to this person, they were all about the experience for the end user. So for EA Sports, this person kept telling me, and she kept mentioning this, is saying that for EA Sports, it's all about if you download it, it's the same user experience if you buy it and plug it in. It's the same user experience if you're playing online by yourself or if you're with a group of people based externally. And her thought was, if you could create medicines or devices that were for the end user and then reverse engineer to how they might be created, that could be a really interesting development for the sector, rather than creating a pill or a device and saying, we've got this for you, now use it this way. So she was a fascinating example of exactly what you were saying, Tony, of a really interesting background, very different perspective. But I think it's fair to say it took a little bit of advocacy to get her through the door. Like they really liked her. She liked them. Exactly. She wasn't quite the fit they were expecting when we started.
And I guess that's also, it's an interesting perspective to kind of start from the user end and work back. And that's sort of starting with the end in sight. I guess in the context of careers, that's the part of this conference really is part of us as One Nucleus and working with people like yourselves is to open up that awareness of where you could end up. So that if you then pick a target of what you want to end up doing, how do you work back from it?
Yeah, and I'm sure my own career is a good example of this. Is you can start with one place in mind. For me, running around on a rugby pitch and end up somewhere else. So I think there needs to be flexibility, and I always talk to people, particularly at the early stage of their careers, is thinking not just about the role they want now, but the role they will want afterwards, and thinking about in this role they're going to take on, will it provide them with some of the skills, some of the experiences and things that will help them move to that next one later. Now that next one can still be in the same company, but making sure that they're thinking about, will it provide me with some of the additional skills that go beyond just the job description. And so, a big business will have a very different environment and working structure than a small business where you may be, 1 minute you're there doing your job, the next day you're the one setting the alarm, making sure everything's set up properly for the next day, or indeed suddenly having to take out the bins because no one else is available to do it.
Yes, right. Yeah, there's no one else there. So yeah, that's your job too, which is, and I guess there is that everyone will find their comfort environment to some degree. I know there's like go out of your comfort zone and be edgy, but actually lots of people want to be in a comfort zone and excel within it.
And there's something about being patient too. So again, going back to the case studies that Jazz mentioned at the end, there was a lady who I got to know very well from a course here in Cambridge, and she went back into equity analysis in the city. She really wanted to get into pharma, but it just wasn't the right time. Eventually an opportunity came up, which she applied for, and we spent some time together talking about that step. Again, it didn't quite work out. Circumstances, the more senior role got pulled, so the person who was going to take that role moved into the junior post, so she was still not quite there. 2 years later, that person then got promoted, an opportunity again appeared, and we sat down and had that discussion and moved into pharma, applying the very same competitive analytics, business intelligence, and a lot of the skills she learned in the city, she was then going to apply in this particular company. And the key thing that the company wanted were people who were comfortable speaking their own mind, not afraid to go ahead with what would be, I guess, evidence-based decision making, but in some cases might be seen as a bit of a risk, but being prepared to back their own judgment. And someone at that age and level, I would have said, that's quite a hard thing to find. So I was delighted, and she's gone on to be a very, very big success. And funnily enough, is busy working in helping us all with the COVID vaccines as we speak. So delighted how that's worked out.
That is amazing. That is amazing. So the kind of advice you would give is, I guess, be willing to take a bit of a risk, but also make sure you're patient at the same time. And just because something doesn't work out maybe the first time, not to give up. Or yeah,
absolutely. And that sort of, and we're all, everybody's using this word resilience because of the circumstances now. But yeah, just being resilient and thinking, I think everybody wants things yesterday. That's just natural. And in your careers, I think we all have moments where we think, oh, I could be doing that person's job from the outside. And it's only when you get there and you see what that person's job really involves, do you realize that actually you did need a bit more experience or a bit more time doing the job itself. So yeah, I think it's very good to have that time. And I would always advocate for, if you've got ideas in mind, is ask you, Jazz, ask Tony, ask One Nucleus. I'm thinking about the next step. What do you think I need to learn? What skills do I need to develop? There are advocates out there, and the industry is incredibly supportive of each other. One of the things I love about working in this sector is that the number of people who will say, I will put time aside to help this individual develop, with no other interest apart from thinking it will be good for everybody. It's wonderful. And it's having done some work in a couple of other sectors, I can say that our industry is quite unusual in that way.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think it's interesting as well about that, people setting time aside to help others. One of the panels at the event is around mentoring and how important it is, not just for an individual within a company, but actually for the whole ecosystem, that people spend that time paying it forward, I think was the phrase someone had used.
Yeah.
From your experience of helping people, do you think, mentoring can be quite a personal thing, that chemistry has to work between mentor and mentee. Is it often better if the mentor is outside of your organization or supported from within your organization?
Oh, that's such a good question. My tendency is to think outside. I'll put my head on the block on that, just simply because I think you can give a perspective. And it may mean you don't maybe get the nuances of the technology or the area they're involved with, but I think you're able to act more independently as an advocate for that person. And certainly in my experience with mentorships, and I've been involved with some locally with the likes of Find a Cure, a local charity, and Homerton Changemakers now and things, is actually how you set up the mentor-mentee relationship early on is crucial. And having sort of half an hour to an hour, how long it might be, over a cup of coffee or now virtually, getting to know them, and seeing what both people want to take away from that relationship is a great way to start. I think there's sometimes a bit of a danger that as the mentor, you think you're there to exude knowledge and pass in on insights, and actually it's a two-way process. And I've certainly found that whenever I've been involved, I've learned a great deal back the other way, if not more so. So I think the mentor-mentee, great thing to do. I'm huge advocate of that. And I do think having someone outside the organization, maybe with some associated links, was probably the best way of managing that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think mentoring, sometimes you learn as much about yourself as you teach the other person, I think.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
I know. Jazz, do you want to come in there? I'm conscious I can talk all day, so
so how would you, so it's great, these kind of career opportunities that are available, and you talk about networking a little bit, but what advice would you give on getting there? How do they make these steps forwards and gain as much information as possible?
Yeah, again, really, really valuable point to raise. I think there are sort of two places to come from. There's what you want to do yourself. So building your own network, in the old days, it would be going to events, going to conferences, linked into the likes of One Nucleus. I mean, you've always got events and meetings, whether they're London, Cambridge and beyond, the links with by a partner, the links with So during my career, I've been fortunate enough to attend multiple conferences in different countries, as well as on different subjects. That's a great way to build up that network of people where you can learn about other aspects of the industry and just be curious. I think it's fantastic to ask someone a question, beyond the normal questions about why do you enjoy doing what you do? Why do you think it's something that's important for the future? And then the other part of it is having put in the effort yourself, and that includes, maybe some PR activity, interviews, magazines, articles, blogs, all those sorts of things, is also maybe looking at building that network and connecting people yourself. Because if you start providing connections, guess what? Those people are going to be open to connecting back the other way. And that includes with recruiters. A good recruiter will be your advocate in the market, keeping an eye out for you, keep an idea on careers. And they should be the sort of people who know a little bit about your background personally as well as professionally, and will support you in that process, and prepared sometimes to say, maybe now's not the right time for this, or have you considered the impact of doing X compared if you stay doing Y? The other thing I think it's important to remember for anybody looking at alternatives, have the discussion internally first if you can. It's not always possible, but wherever possible. Most companies have great HR departments. They want to look after their people. They want to keep them. So open that dialogue with them first. You never know. The number of times I've had people say, oh, I've decided I'm moving on. And then as they're leaving, found out that actually the very opportunity they were after was right there in-house. But they just didn't have the discussion before.
I guess the other side of that career shifting, if maybe I want to explore this avenue a bit further. I think internally is a great place to start that discussion, and good employers will create an environment where that can happen, I guess, and do that. If you're sort of a lab trained and lab based scientist, you think, actually, what, I quite like this business aspect. What do you think the biggest challenge is for a research scientist to say, I want to move into a commercial role?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I did some work with EMBL a few years ago on intrapreneurship and entrepreneurship, and talking about if you are thinking that's the step you want to take, is make sure it's right for you. The idea of it may be very appealing, but the reality can sometimes be quite different. You're taking yourself out of your comfort zone. So maybe try and set up where you are projects where you'll have more work with the commercial teams, spend time with the commercial teams. And that's again where tapping into a network where maybe you can talk to someone who will comfortably put you in touch with someone who's already doing that role to explain, day to day what it looks like, can be really valuable. And having had some time, on this intrapreneurship of trying that yourself within the company and thinking, actually, this is something I want to do, of then, being bold and trying to make that step. And again, talking to people. And that's where, I would say that recruitment consultants, again, come into their own, because they will act as an advocate, and you can go to them and say, I want to make this step. You know me. I know if my CV arrives through, they're going to think I want that person in the lab, but I really want to get out now. Can you help me? And that's when hopefully, we always talk about the wildcard candidate. You have the 4 that match the brief perfectly, and then the 5th sometimes will be the one who you say, there's something about them. They've got this, je ne sais quoi that I want to explore. And very often they're the ones who end up getting the role because of this enthusiasm and energy that they bring to it.
Yeah, I guess it's that passion for what you want to do shines through. It's almost infectious at that point, I think. And yes, but it's odd you say that, because I was thinking when you said about, you look at someone else's job and think I could do that now, but maybe now isn't quite the time. I think what's interesting with that, I think everybody looks at other people's jobs and only sees the good bits.
Yeah, that's very true. And
they don't see what the other stuff behind the scenes is that they don't like doing. And every job has that.
Yeah, and it really reinforces, doesn't it, the idea that actually building skills in whatever you're doing now that are transferable to other areas. So you've got examples that you can share. If you're moving into a high pressure, deadline driven job and you're in a job that doesn't have that, what have you done either in your job or outside of your work that matches that? I'm a big one for saying and looking at people's background and saying, what have you done outside of work? And it might be charitable work, it might be something within the sporting, music, arts. It could be all sorts of different areas, clubs, affiliations, associations, grants, those sorts of things. Make sure that you're thinking, actually, I've already done part of that job. I just wasn't aware because it's under a different title.
Yeah, I think that's really important to students as well, because they'll be looking for jobs and coming straight out of university, they might be a little bit overwhelmed and think, okay, I actually don't think I've got any of those skills. But when they take a step back and think about what they've actually done, they've got so many transferable skills that they've learned over the years from doing their degrees, masters, PhDs. So yeah, I think that's really important for them to kind of believe in themselves a little bit.
Yeah, and as I said, it's lovely if they're talking to somebody who's already doing the job, they will be filled with a bit of that enthusiasm too, and there's the excitement of them coming, makes you actually appreciate what you're doing more. It's lovely. It's a two-way process.
Definitely.
Yeah,
I think it's kind of interesting. If you flipped it round the other way, I guess we've been talking about careers and how to get on, but equally from an employer's perspective, when you're working with a client, most people are happiest when they're in an organization that share the same sort of values that they share and have this, particularly in an area like healthcare, where it's that driver to improve lives quite dramatically in some instances. But with that, I guess, how often do employers communicate well their values? And I guess an add-on to that, if I may, is do they put the right people in the interview room to communicate those values and demonstrate? Based on what you see a portfolio of these things.
Yeah. The reason I'm chuckling, of course, is because that not always, I think, is the answer. Very often they try to, but actually, back to your point there, the values they're quite difficult to hold on to. Values change, and cultures change in companies. So you can have some great ideas in a culture at the startup stage, which is very clear. It's top down. It's the founders and the investors are all involved in that and actively, have an interest in it. And then over time, as a business grows, that can dissipate a little. And if you take a pool of people from a certain area, a new culture can start to come in. And I think it's something that ideally you want in that interview panel, a mix of, the old, the new, and those who've been there a few years to actually present the full picture of the way it is. I had a very interesting experience not too long ago where an individual who's actually leaving the company insisted on being on a panel, finding their replacement. And what they felt they could bring was an honest perspective of what the job entailed, but also actually a really positive reason for why they'd stayed so long. So rather than thinking I'm off, they actually came to that interview table saying, the reason I'm going is X, Y, and Z, and it was, very personal, but also this is what I think you're going to really enjoy about this business. This is why I've stayed for X number of years. That was really powerful. I wouldn't advocate that every time.
There's a balance, I guess. But
but the values piece is so crucial. If you're in the right place, you feel it. You just have that sense of belonging, that sense of it feels right. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges we face now is how do you get a sense of culture and values when you're doing all of this online and remotely? You can't walk around an office. You can't ask someone quietly over a cup of coffee, is it really what they say? So I hope over time we will, be able to move back into more face-to-face meetings. That'll definitely be useful, I think, on the value side.
Yeah, I guess that's right. Yeah.
Definitely. So just before we finish up, I've got a question for you, I guess, which is a bit more personal. Is there something that maybe across your career journey that you're grateful for, maybe? If you can give me maybe one thing that stands out to you.
Can I give you two? I'm going to try and cheat.
Go on.
The first one, it's the people. It's and here I am talking to you now. One Nucleus has been, as I knew years ago as Irby and things, have been fantastic. As an organisation, as a support organisation, and for someone who is based locally and whose career has been based locally, having a structure and a setup where there is somewhere you can go. They will always put you in touch with the right people and always have those conversations is really powerful. It's like the backstop, I don't know what to do, I know I can make a call. So one is a big thank you to you and the team, but also to the sector for creating that. And the other thing I'm hugely grateful is just for what we do. Seeing the whole COVID situation now and having my children ask me about my knowledge of vaccines and seeing the impact it's having when I'm talking at schools and careers is really powerful. And recruitment, I think, would be very different if I was in another sector. But being in this sector means that I feel very, very fortunate.
Amazing.
It's kind of built, I guess, the whole sector is built on that common cause. Even though you get bogged down in Monday morning issues, actually, I feel as One Nucleus, we're very lucky when we do some of our larger events. So we're in a position that we can bring that many people, all with that common cause, into one space, and it's quite a privilege to be part of that. To be frank. But I think the other side of it, sorry, Jazz, just to finish off on the end of that, I'm going to add to the question. I think is that bit about, I don't know what to do, where to go and ask. And I think we often create kind of fear factors around going networking for students. It's almost like we tell them, you've got to have an elevator pitch, you've got to follow up the next day, everyone you meet might be your next employer. And they're kind of a nervous wreck by the time they get and the worst case scenario is if they don't find a job when they go networking, or there's nothing to follow up on, they go away thinking either they're very bad at it and networking is majority of it is competence, or they think it's not worthwhile, which is also untrue, because that's where a lot of relationships build and careers are built and opportunities come up. So how do we address that better, do you think, Tarquin?
Yeah, and I was just reaching for some notes, simply because it's so important. And I often think that when you're there at a conference or networking, the question you have to ask is this going to be a coffee chat, as it were, where we're going to go sort of off piste and not necessarily talk about work, or is this a business conversation? And to take the pressure off, I've been to conferences where the technology that's being discussed is something that would take me a very long time to learn and understand. And the experts who are there, I can't really talk to them at the same level about that particular area of science. What I can talk to, of course, is about what makes them excited about the area of technology, how it might impact communities and groups of people. And then obviously there's just the curiosity. So my feeling about networking is it's just about getting to know some people, and off the back of that you'll get to know some you want to stay in touch with, and others who you think it was lovely meeting at that event, but actually I probably won't need to stay in touch in future, and that's okay. And I guess the final thing I would say is also the sincerity of wanting to learn about them, that curiosity. I'm always keen to find out what drives that person, what is it about their background that makes them different, and if you can take that away, you won't forget them, and hopefully they won't forget you either.
Yeah, it's a very human side of what we do, I think, the networking, and it often gets confused, I think, and sort of create this shroud around it, but actually it's just about people being themselves most of the time, which is, and curious. But yeah, okay.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much today for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm really looking forward for everybody else to watch this actually back. So thank you very much, Tarquin.
Thank you so much. Thank you to you and the team, and thank you, Tony. Thank you, Jazz.
Thanks, Tarquin. Thank you. Bye.